do have that conversation as far as my handicapped minute. Do give some thought about how you want your end of life to be. I know it's not a pretty subject, it's not something that you normally want to dwell on much, but we are mortals and the end of our time does come. And I encourage y'all to think about those end-of-life issues. Of course, if you've got a good chance of coming out of something alive, life is precious. You want to survive. But you want to give some thought to maybe you're at the end of your life and maybe you don't want extraordinary means employed to keep you alive. I didn't know much about the end-of-life process until I talked to my friend, the CNA, who says that she's been at the bedside through many, many deaths, usually elderly people with a whole host of life-threatening problems, health problems. And in that circumstance, if they're already suffering greatly and they are not wanting to be resuscitated, a lot of times the family will insist, "Oh, Granny, I want you alive. I want you to be here with me." And, you know, of course you want to be with your grandchildren. You want to be with your husband, your sons and daughters, your brothers and sisters. But if your existence is pretty miserable anyway, take my mother. We were her family and had to make that end-of-life choice for her. And fortunately, it was pretty easy because her brainstem was dead. And the doctors could verify that. The chances of somebody coming back from that intact are close to none. So we made the choice to pull the plug, not to feed her, try to keep her going. You know, we definitely just decided it was kinder to pull the plug, not to try to extend her life. And that means no feeding tube, no heart-lung machine to breathe and make her heart beat. We have the technology to keep a body alive, but it's really, you know, you can go through some horrible things in the emergency room that keep you alive. And if you're younger, if you don't have a whole host of health problems, it's a different thing, you know. And if you've got a bunch of health problems, but you're still having a happy life, then of course you want them to employ all of their tools in the toolkit to keep you alive. I'm not talking about if you are enjoying life and you want to continue enjoying life, even with multi-handicaps, even with obvious handicaps, contractures and all. If you're enjoying life and you want to live, then this is not the kind of thing that I would suggest for you. But if you have lots of health problems, constant pain,
arrived at your destination,
not able to enjoy a lot of things in life, and generally not happy being alive, then extraordinary measures might not be for you. So you want to think about these things, because in the dying process, many organs shut down. And it is a very painful process. when the organs are shutting down, lots of bad things happen to cause a lot of pain. I don't want to go into graphic, gory detail, but I suggest that before you suggest a feeding tube for a relative that you know is already suffering a lot, the food doesn't go anywhere. If the internal organs are shutting down, which they do so in pretty much the last 2 weeks of life, then any food that is given is either going to make the person choke, or if they have a feeding tube, the food is not absorbed, so they may be being fed, but if your doctor says that they're not really going to be able to use it to keep themselves alive, then it just prolongs the misery. So it's very important, if you get to this point with a relative, that you listen to the doctors. They know what the dying process is like and how miserable it can be when relatives insist on keeping a relative alive that can't really recover. So you may think you don't want your loved one to be hungry, or you don't want your loved one to, but believe me, if they're in that last 2 weeks where their organs are shutting down, their stomach and their intestines can't absorb the food. It just sits there and makes them miserable. So listen to your doctors and medical professionals. Don't just decide, well, I don't want them to be hungry. Well, death is miserable enough without adding fuel to the fire, so to speak. So it is good to listen to those that know what's going on with that. Definitely you want to take advantage of all the expertise around you, because what you think might be kindness might be just adding to the misery. So don't insist on doing things your way when doctors are saying this is not a good idea. And if you are worried, get a second opinion or third opinion. You don't have to just take the word of somebody that you don't fully trust. Hopefully you've got a good relationship with your doctor, or, if you're in the case of a relative, you don't know them like your relative did. So maybe you're having to make a choice for a relative. But I encourage you to read up. Read some stories that families have put up about watching their loved one die, and use that information to make your own decisions about your end of life, because it's worth doing that, because things can happen suddenly. You can end up in the ER in a traffic accident when you were fine, healthy, going to work that day, and then boom, disaster happens. You want to have your wishes decided and laid out in your living will document. I encourage everybody to do a living will and do the research so you know exactly what those boxes mean as you're checking them off. Because you want to know exactly what dying entails, and if you are dying and there's no chance of your recovery, you want to have all the comforts that you can, that medical science can offer you. If I was in that last 2 weeks, I would want to just be kept asleep. I would not want to be aware for it. it. And, I would like to have some time to say what I'm going to say to anybody who's surviving me. But I wouldn't want extraordinary measures just keeping my body alive when my soul has probably already fled. So, I'm of the opinion that Heavenly Father decides when you are going to pass beyond the veil. And that if it's not your time, it's not your time. But there are things you can do to make yourself more comfortable that doctors can do. And it's good if your family listens to that and knows a little bit about what's involved, especially if you don't know anything about medicine, if you haven't had anybody who had to go to the doctor a lot. If you don't have that life experience, then it's good to read up on it and kind of know what that entails. A lot of handicapped people have gone through a lot more medical experience than most of their family. So you need to make your family understand, hey, if I'm to the point that my body is shutting down, maybe I don't want extraordinary measures. So I'm just encouraging y'all to do the research and find out before you're in the position of having to make a decision that could extend the misery if there's not much hope of the person surviving. On the other hand, there are some people who, knowing that, will still choose to have all the extraordinary measures, and there's nothing wrong with that. But, as for me, I'm going to want done what is best for my family and best for me, and the two don't have to be different goals. I just want to make sure that when I'm writing my living will, that I know what the terms mean. I know what things that they might do in the hospital. And a lot of things that keep you alive are very miserable, like having a ventilator put on you is a very miserable type of thing. So, if someone's in relatively good shape and their organs are not shutting down, yeah, I would take a ventilator tube. I know it's miserable, but I would take it. If I was in that last 2 weeks of life, however, I would not want one. If my organs were shutting down and there was no chance of me coming back from that. So, doctors can tell you what's going on with that, and it's worth having the discussion with your doctor. Take your living will in there and talk to your doctor and say, can you explain some of these things to me? Or if you've got a friend who's a nurse or other medical professional, if you've got a friend who's a CNA and who has been with dying people, or if you've got somebody who works in hospice, talk to them and ask them to explain it to you. Because it's worth it to know these things before you need to know them, while you're still coherent and able to make these decisions. So, and I would encourage you to encourage your family members to think about it. It's not pleasant, but it's good to know what your loved one's wishes are. And that's my message for today. I hope that you don't have to go through what I've gone through this week with 2 relatives in the hospital, one in ICU for COVID. It has not been very pleasant, and I'm still not, I know too much, having had a mother who was an ER nurse, so I know that things can be great one day and awful the next, but I am taking the blessings as they come and very grateful that my relatives are doing better, but I sure am nervous still about what's going to happen, There's a lot of long-term effects from COVID that they're just discovering about. So, I'm not complacent, but on the other hand, I have hope. So with that, I will leave you for tonight and hope you have a pleasant evening. And I will see you again on Forza Horizon 4 Saturday night. Until then, this is GrannyHandicap, aka Dennis Cole, wishing you a good night. Take care.